Hello, and welcome to Lore Watch, a roundtable freeform discussion about learning your favorite media. I'm your host, Joe Perez, one of several lore-focused folks from Blizzard Watch, and I've got my marvelous co-host with me today, Matt Ross. How are you doing today, Matt?
I got dragged into this by the elf. That's what I'm doing here. I got the elf dragged me into this. That's one of my favorite parts of the whole thing, man.
Well, I mean, it's kind of the what we're going to be talking about a little bit today, I guess, because this is going to be a spoiler-filled episode. I'm going to warn you guys right now up front. We're going to be talking about the story of the Ghosts of Koresh, which is the current WoW patch up through basically what happens to the end of the raid, if we can get there. If we can't, then we'll do another episode, but we'll see how far we get. Basically, there's a lot of stuff that happens that I thought it would be relevant for us to, one, talk about, but also sort of give our insights to it. A lot of people have been asking for us to sort of like chime in, so figured now's a good time. So I guess we'll start where things always start, or seem to always start, which is we completely seem to forget about what our current threats are because there's a new cosmic threat on our doorstep, which requires us to go to another planet to help the Ethereals and help the brokers and help, in particular, in this case, Locust Walker, to stop Dementius from being reborn in the galaxy. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a bad thing for everybody in the galaxy if Dementius gets reborn, but I feel like it was just sort of, I don't know, whiplash is the best way that I can put it, I guess, would be my first impression about it. We go from stopping Gallywix and liberating Undermine to flying across the cosmos to a void-bound planet with our friends, the brokers and the Ethereals, to start trying to take the fight to a cosmic level threat again. I don't know how you felt about it, Matt.
Oh, I got lucky in that I just resubbed and re-everythinged after a relatively long break, and I'll be up front. I didn't have even the slightest effing interest in Gallywix or whatever the heck the goblins are up to. In fact, I delayed resubbing because of that patch. This was what I wanted. When I heard what this was, I'm like, now this is what I thought we were getting. This is what I wanted. This is my favorite patch already before I even played it. And then I played it and I was like, oh yeah, I liked the intro chapter. I really did. I liked the first part of the War Within. I had zero interest in goblin shenanigans, which is fine. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying I personally don't care. But then we got this, and I was like, oh heck yes, I am down for it. And I was so, instead of having whiplash, I was super relieved that I could just go straight to this.
See, and
quite frankly, that's what I wanted to do. Oh, so gosh, you're trying to talk, and I'm
no, you're good. You're good. I was just gonna say I agree with you. Like, it's one of those things where, like, I definitely wanted to do this. I just didn't expect it to happen so soon. Like,
here's the thing, though, and I mean, are we going spoilers right out the door?
Yeah,
we did the warning.
We've already given the warning.
I was like, this was so.
It was telegraphed.
A setup.
Yeah,
it's a setup for other stuff. Like, we're gonna find out as we're recording this. We're gonna find out in like 2 days. Like, we're gonna see the first looks at midnight.
Yep.
And I am positive. I'm just going to drop this. There's stuff in Koresh that makes me think that we are finally going to find out that the Titans are just straight up full of beep.
Yeah, I agree.
Straight up.
I think we're both on the same page on that one.
Yeah, and I think that this is the first. There's a whole thing in this chapter about the world soul of Koresh. And is it still going? Is it still alive? Has the world soul somehow survived Dementius? And that, to me, sets up so much for what's actually going to happen on Azeroth in Midnight. And so I thought, like, that was the first thing that hit me was like, Koresh is just the appetizer. It's just the warm-up. And I had not expected it to be that. I expected Koresh to be like a whole expansion. But then again, I thought Argus could have been a whole expansion. You know what I'm saying?
So that's part of where I'm getting at. Like, this sort of, and we'll get into the meat of the story here in a minute. It had shades of Argus. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I didn't mind going to Argus, but I thought that Argus could have been an entire expansion on its own, potentially with the meat of the story that could be derived from there. And in fact, at one point, I figured that Argus and Koresh would be dealt with at the same time because they have similar threads and similar fates. Now, the reason I say Whiplash is not because, again, I want to make this perfectly clear. It's not that I hate that we're on Koresh and doing what we're doing. It's just that we have left two very large gaping holes back on Azeroth that we spent the last two patches setting up to completely drop. And usually, or at least I will say this, the last few expansions have not been that egregious in leaving that many loose threads open.
See, I will say that I think one of the threads is actually part of this.
Maybe.
And I'll explain why. But I do get what you're saying, and I don't even disagree with you. I think that to a certain degree, and this is speculation on my part, but I think to a certain degree, what happened was some of the War Within was written before certain things happened to the Blizzard team, and some of it was written after.
I was going to say, I think some of it was written before a certain someone came back in particular, and some of it may have been rewritten after and pushed up and moved around a bit. Because what this feels like to me is Koresh feels like something that should have been like the opening salvo to Midnight, and it is.
Yeah,
but it's like,
but you mean it should have been the opening of Midnight? Like it should have literally been going to Koresh in Midnight.
And here's the reason I say that, and I just want to get, because I'm going to get into the story here in a second, because the two threads that I know, one of which I think we was probably going to be tied up in this is, we never really finished dealing with the Black Blood. We never finished dealing with Beladar. We never finished dealing with the Harengar. Like, all of this stuff is just completely, like, dropped. The Arathi stuff is completely dropped. Like, the previous patch really doesn't resolve anything with the Arathi. It just sort of, yep, we're part of the world of Azeroth now, and everybody sings and dances and fights together, and then we move on with our lives. It just seems like a lot of that discord didn't get solved. And in chapter 1 of the first part of the War Within, the earthen stuff seems pretty buttoned up. Like, that stuff's fine. Like, I thought that was really cohesive. That was great. The undermine stuff tied in with the Black Blood stuff, but then all that gets dropped so that we can go here. And I think maybe the Black Blood stuff does tie in with what we're going to be facing in Midnight, but it felt to me very jarring. And the reason I say that this feels like an opening for an expansion is mostly because of how the story is laid out. So right now, I believe we have 4 or 5 chapters that we have currently available. And in the first one, it's essentially what you would expect from the beginning of an opening of any expansion. You're in a new land. You have some familiar allies, but mainly you're trying to find new allies and get certain pieces in place in order to fight the coming threat. It's got that buildup that's supposed to be happening. Something that we didn't really do with Undermine. And in this particular case, you're unlocking the story of the Brokers and the Ethereals, and you're introduced to the fact that the Brokers and the Ethereals are the same entities, just one has a different type of containment suit that they live in. So I think Matt may have called that a long time ago. I think we talked about it on the podcast a long time ago. You find out that they're the same people. Koresh was their home. The way that they are is a result of what happened and choices that they made, and just the Brokers decided that they were going to go to the Shadowlands and needed a better containment suit for the rigorous effects of the Shadowlands, which makes sense if they're or beings of pure energy and spirit. Going to the Shadowlands is probably the last thing you want to do if you can't contain yourself, because you at that point you're pretty much just ripe to go into the anima farm, at least as far as I got. But then you're starting to learn more about the Void itself, the history of Koresh, and why the planet was blown up. This is the first several chapters. You're also then put into contact with not just Locust Walker, but then Xalatath is pulled in as an enemy of my enemy is my friend, because you're learned throughout the opening salvos of this campaign that the reason the Ethereals were able to survive what happened to Koresh is because of Xalatath. and that Xalatath is the one that warned Locust Walker of Dementius. And that Xalatath, even despite being Dementius's harbinger, doesn't like Dementius. Like, there's a whole bunch of, like, I don't want to say weird, but it's a bunch of story beats that feel like they're setting up for a broader story that would be contained over a series of months, not weeks. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that's why if you get through the whole campaign, it definitely doesn't resolve itself.
No, it doesn't.
It is not in any way, shape, or form resolved. Um, if I were to kind of piggyback off what you're saying, I think if I were to say one of the confusing things about the War Within is that it has no through line.
Yeah, well, I would argue that chapters 1 and 2 had a through line,
Except that because you just mentioned all the stuff that doesn't get resolved.
yeah.
Chapter 1, I'll go with you on chapter 1 having a through line. Chapter 2, suddenly we go to Undermine, and it's looking like it will be important, and the stuff that you're talking about resolving, at least some of it will get resolved, like the
Because it
Black
feels like,
Blood. Maybe,
yeah, it feels like
but
we're
then,
fishing for allies in the fight and going after Xalatath.
yeah, but then it doesn't get resolved. And
Mm-hmm.
part of the reason it doesn't get resolved, in my opinion, is that I do think, and this is something I've thought since I got through this part of the game, I think we were always supposed to have a swerve at this point.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was going to be in terms of where it was going to get placed. I didn't know if it was going to be on Koresh or what, but I think we were going to end up working with Xalatath. And part of that is the stuff we saw in the like heck, they just introduced these things, the visions in the past that you can go do with the Time Walkers. You know what I'm talking about. The Time Walker vision. Yeah, the Time Walking visions. With the lore walkers who take you to, here's the story of Xalatath. And you remember at the time, like you said, they put in a Lich King one, but the Lich King isn't really involved at all.
Mm-hmm.
Why'd they put that in there? I think that's stuff that's going to be coming up, not just as it's a metaphor for how the Nexus King that we fight in the raid, how he has basically been playing everybody off against each other this whole time. He's a king who is basically not ruling properly, much as Arthas, he lied to the mercenaries and he betrayed them, sort of thing. Like it's how Arthas was doing when he lost his way. That Nexus King has too, but that's just a motif. What I really think is going to be coming up is over and over again we see somebody get, they're right in their objection, but they let the objection override their ability to make a decision now. And we see that, and we see Ilaria come like a razor inch away from going there, but managing not to. And I think these are stuff that they're setting up to basically say this trilogy of stories, whenever we get to the end of this, the goal was to say we're finally definitively breaking these cycles, which is something we hear all the time about the old gods. And I don't think the stuff that we've been talking about, you and I have been talking about, I don't think any of that stuff is going to be in the next expansion. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think that we're going to see Ravagers or any of that stuff, the Devourers. I think we're going to see them in the next one. And the reason for that is looking at how this one comes up, how we get to this point. It's pretty clear that Xalatath, when beaten, instead of trying to come up with a new way to kill us, he decides, I need to co-opt them. Obviously, they're too strong for me to just crush them. And instead, I need to use them to get my revenge on Dementius and my further plans beyond that, because there's effing no way that this is her goal. You know what I mean? Like, Dementius is a step on a path for her. And it is fascinating to think about the fact that, as you pointed out, she was Dementius' harbinger. The second she got a chance, she betrayed Dementius, a Void Lord. the second she got a chance.
Yeah,
The second she got to a planet and she found out there's a thing here that can help me do this. There's just a lot to it that is it is part of what we've been seeing this whole expansion, but I definitely agree with you that it feels like they were like, okay, we're just jumping over here now. And you're like, but you literally what is the deal with the black blood? What is going on? What's these bat people you made us meet? What are they? What's their deal? The Arathi, what's their deal? I definitely think we are going to see more of it, but it is incredibly jarring to not see it now.
yeah, and we do know, like, there are some things, like, we know that the next expansion is going to deal a lot with Azeroth and going back to Azeroth. That's pretty plain from the teaser trailer that we got for Midnight, and I'm sure that there'll be plenty of it to come. But going back to the actual story of it, so throughout the course of the meat of the story, we learn a little bit more about the fact that one, Koresh did have a world soul, something that I believe at one point we were told it didn't have. I think it was during a BlizzCon interview, but I think we've always speculated that that was a lie, or that it had to have had something that had to be important. And that's the reason why Dementius, or the Void in general, was ever interested in it.
Yeah.
And turns out that that's true. You learn that two things happened. One, in order to defeat Dementius, and to survive the presence of Dementius, because he is such a devouring and towering creature that would destroy your mortal form, that Xalatath actually worked with the Ethereals to essentially give
Yeah, I
them
believe it's a Ravel. The Ravel in particular is the group that she worked with.
they call them the Ravel, but there's more to it, because it was originally all people were involved with this, which was a ritual to transform all of the Ethereals, well, whatever they were before being Ethereals, into Ethereals, giving them the magic bindings and abilities in these wraps, or what are called Reshi wraps, essentially, to essentially replace their physical form with being an entity of pure energy and keep themselves contained. We then learn throughout the story that Locust Walker in particular, despite being consumed by the void in some capacity, or air quote mastering it, and saying that he was doing it to be a hunter, or whatever the case is, was part of the Ravel, which turned Koresh into a bomb intended to destroy and fragment Dementius. And that happened. Koresh was blown up, not by Dementius, not by a Titan, but by the very people that lived on that planet itself. And Dementius was reduced to scraps, fragments of its former self.
Yeah, one of the things we fought on the Mana Forge way back in Burning Crusade, that was just a fragment.
Yeah, it was a piece of it.
The whole thing.
Yeah. And contained within the core of Koresh, or with the leftovers of it, essentially, where the Mana Forge is essentially a fragment of Dementius that is slowly waking up, because over time, these Ethereals that are void bound, or bound to Dementius, whether this is a willing servitude or a forced servitude, these entities are gathering souls, gathering other ethereal energies, and feeding it to the forge that goes directly into essentially waking Dementius back up. And that is part of the whole reason that they wanted I think it was the Nexus Stalker or whatever, wanted the Dark Heart to begin with, or the Prince, the Nexus Prince.
No, I know you're talking about, yeah.
They wanted the Dark Heart because it would be able to channel all of that void energy, all of that necrotic energy, all of the energy that Xalatath had been storing and pulling into it, to feed into the Mana Forge to complete their ritual for waking up Dementius. Now, all that makes perfect sense in terms of a all-consuming Galactus-style void entity. I don't have any problems with that. The interesting thing is they never, ever explain throughout the entire course of this, even through the end of the raid, if those void bound were willing or not.
Yeah, there's a whole thing in this patch about oaths and about for the ethereals and brokers.
Oh yeah, we're gonna get into
Uh,
that in a second because I have some opinions.
yeah. But oaths are like they transcend like will, and it's very real. It's, if you remember the Helm of Domination slash Helm of Will, uh, it's that. It's very similar to that where you can have this oath that you've sworn, whether or not you wanted to swear it. Once it's out there, you have to follow it. Like you can. There's a whole exchange where Illyria's like, you don't have to do this, and they're like, I can't die an oathbreaker.
Which
Like it's terrifying to
yeah,
them. And so I'm going to let Joe go ahead and
let's
speculate.
talk about that and build up to it because one of the things you find is that the high priest class, the class of high priest ethereals that used to serve the king and used to actually be able to commune with the world soul of Koresh in a way that did not destroy them or cause them to be like Magni, which I think is interesting, and we never really get to dive so deep into that yet. Um, but we find out that pieces of Koresh are still alive, that the world soul itself is still present there, albeit diminished. It seems like it's repairing. Now, that makes sense to us because going back to Antorus, going back to that entire raid, one of the things you learn is that Titans don't die. Not really. They reform. They turn into energy and souls, and maybe they can be fragmented because we've seen that as well, but not quite the same way that we can be fragmented. Uh, but you find these, and they want to kill the Ravel. They're oath sworn to kill the Ravel because the Ravel destroyed Koresh, and that's the only thing they care about. We make not necessarily peace with them, but we work with them with the help of Zalatath to essentially win them to our side because these Wastelanders are incredible soldiers. They've been living on the wilds of Koresh since everything happened. And one of the things they talk about is having this oath to Koresh. And the part of the story that I take umbrage with is we run into, I think it's Shadowlar, I think is the king, who is a raid boss.
Yeah, yeah.
And he shows up and he's completely voided out on a void dragon. And he says, you swore your oaths to me. You still serve me. You will not be an oath breaker. And then they just flip on us because of it. And the whole thing leading up to this is what Matt was talking about. These oaths are important. These oaths are all binding, but you learn that the Wastelanders had many oaths, one of which was to protect Koresh. And they were talking all the way up to this point about how that was the most important oath. And then in this moment, that oath is completely forgotten because their king is now working for Dementius and is working to resurrect the thing that is going to finish eating their planet. And I don't understand that.
See, here's the thing. I don't know if I'm right about this. And that's something I think I'll need to see more from in Midnight. The vibe I got was that they literally can't say no. Because it's not just them swearing their word. There's a magic to it. Again, similar to the Helm of Domination, where Zeliek hated everything he did. And he was still himself enough that he could control the light, but he had to do what the Lich King wanted him to do.
Yes,
it didn't matter that what he wanted. It didn't matter as long as somebody could control him. I don't know that that's what's happening. I can't absolutely be certain of it. I just think that is the thing that makes the most sense and aligns with what we see in Koresh. But there is no point where I can't look at it and say, I'm absolutely sure of this because he does this magic thing beforehand. I didn't see anything that looked to me like that. So, I do think it feels like there needed to be a little bit more there. Although, again, it does kind of tie into the Zalatath bit Because when Xalatath manipulates them onto our side, and that's straight up, she doesn't convince them. She doesn't win their. She straight up manipulates these poor
Oh,
suckers.
100%.
And I felt icky watching it. I'll be upfront, like I helped this happen. I feel not good about my choices right now. Um, it definitely feels like she's like, it's a good thing he's dead, then, isn't it? And you don't have to obey that oath because he's gone. And then later on, of course, he isn't dead. And I think that was like a segue, like that was a hint of why it's important. And we know it's in one of the raid fights that you actually have to, like, you yourself have sworn an oath and you have to break it. You have to become an oath breaker to beat the boss. I believe it's either,
It's his fight.
yeah.
But
And but yeah, I get you what you're saying, and I don't disagree with you that it does feel like, what about the oath you swore to Koresh? But maybe Koresh is in no position to enforce it.
yeah, but the thing is, like, this is where I'm talking about, like, this feels like it should have been longer content, I think.
It feels like it should have been an entire expansion. Like starting off the chapters of this feel like they should have been like
Whole content releases on their own.
like the way we've had, part 1, part 2, part 3 here, where the campaign, this is the second campaign. That should have been an entire expansion. Like, it really does feel like there's so much they want to get to that they are like, it almost, remember the old talk about how expansions were like theme parks?
Mm-hmm.
And how, sometimes they were like rides on theme parks, like you just go in and get this experience. It feels like at this point, it's like being on a tour of Six Flags where, the person in charge, like, let's just say your grandma or whoever, is absolutely convinced that you only have 3 hours to do all of Six Flags. So you're going to do all of Six Flags. Do you get me here? Like, it feels
Yeah,
like,
like,
now we got to do this. Now we got to do that. It's like, hey, go, guys. Do I get a second to digest any of this? Could you maybe go back and explain that bit? Nope. We're going to the next part. Okay.
I mean, that's part of like, and I don't want to say criticism of it, but I mean, like, constructive
It's a
criticism.
criticism. It's not necessarily like, I'm not even saying it's bad. I'm just saying,
Yeah,
for some people, this might be a more breakneck pace than they're accustomed to.
and I think it is a bit breakneck of a pace because, again, it does feel like a lot of content being shoved into a very small amount of time, story wise. In I mean, that's just, again, just me. But so then we wind up going through, and this is before we get to the oath breaking part. The oath breaking part is actually post raid. Well, kind of pre raid and post raid. Um, so we wind up taking out a bunch of the mana forges with the help of the wastelanders. We wind up causing a whole bunch of destruction. We stop. We kill the Nexus Prince that stole the Dark Heart. We take care of a lot of little things in this moment that lead up to the king showing up and demanding that the wastelanders follow him again, which lead us directly into attacking the Mana Forge. And then in that fact of the Mana Forge, we're doing a couple things. One, there is a soldier creation program that's happening in the raid, and it is essentially taking entities, which gives us a little bit of an idea of the process in which some of these voidbound are being turned into soldiers. They're ethereals that are captured, their essences put into tanks, and essentially void infused until they submit. And we have an entire counter based around that. They're being void suffused and trapped into these forms with threads from an entity, a giant moth creature that was essentially born specifically for this purpose. So very much like the Reshi wraps, it's doing the same thing, but now with void inside of them. So we learn about that. We don't learn about how the king got to this state, because one would presume he was among the first, or what triggered him to, or whatever the first ones were, to get in a state to start going after the others. But that's what we see. Then, and I'm trying to think of how else to phrase this. We go into the raid. We wind up killing the king. We essentially break that oath, air quote, because we didn't really swear the oath per se. He tries to use his ethereal magic to force us into an oath. Uh,
Is the
we
bit that reminds me so much of the Helm of
It
Domination.
really does, and there seems to be a lot of there's a lot of parallels between the Helm of Domination, what was happening in the Maw with what the jailer was doing, and what was happening inside the Mana Forge. Again, content that could have very easily been its own like whole thing here for us to explore and experience.
Yeah,
Um,
when you're done, I have some stuff to say that kind of ties into that, but I want you to get to finish what you're saying.
no, go right ahead.
Okay, first up, some things that I think are mentioned kind of in a drop down fashion that don't get enough time to breathe. One of the big ones is at one point Venari has you doing the Ecodome stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And Xalatath and Venari straight up, does not offer Xalatath the single slightest bit of respect or deference. She's like, look, if you're going to be here anyway, go do something. And so you're running around with Xalatath and doing stuff. But there's a certain point where Xalatath says something, and I can't remember quite what it was, but something to Venari, and Venari goes, I've been to the Maw. I know what the Void fears. And it doesn't really come up again. Like, nobody goes, wait, what? Should we be going to the Maw right now? I know somebody who walks Maws. Uh, should we be going over there? Is there a visit we should be performing? But
There's even a
to my
reference to
mind,
the Maw Walker as well a couple times with the
oh yeah,
brokers as well.
yeah. And it's just one of those things where I'm thinking, okay, this is clearly going to come up in Midnight, but meanwhile, what I remember stuff the Void was freaked out by. Specifically, the last thing I can remember that the Void was really freaked out by was Sylvanas.
Mm-hmm.
Because remember, the Void voices tried to get Ilaria to kill Sylvanas. Because Sylvanas freaked the Void out. Was it because Sylvanas is, Forsaken, an undead creature? Was it because Sylvanas' soul was fragmented? Much like Dementius' soul was fragmented? So if living entities can do that too, then suddenly Dementius now has like, things he can't kill. Like, there's a lot to it that we don't know anything about, but it definitely interested me and would have been something I feel like any sane person would be like, pardon me, Venari, what? Could you share that information? Since I'm pretty sure I'm going to be going into a giant building to fight a Void Lord. If you could tell me the thing the Void's afraid of? And it's not that we hadn't seen hints of that before. We absolutely see hints of that before in Shadowlands. When the Void invades the Shadowlands, it invades in the Kyrian realm.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't go anywhere near the Maw. And that's interesting relating to this whole idea of I know what the Void fears. What does the Void fear? So that's the first thing. The second thing is we've talked a few times now about this, talking about how Koresh has a world soul and that world soul appears to be regenerating. I think it's not regenerating so much as the same process that's being, as you bring the Void Lord, Dementius in this case, back to full, the world soul is coming back to full. And what entities have we ever seen that have a void light cycle
Well, I mean,
that
yeah.
does that? I think that the Naru are fragmented world souls. Based on what we're seeing here. And I think that that's why Elune could wake them up. Like with like the Zera. That's why Elune, the Tear of Elune, could essentially bring it back from being in an inert state. Because we keep hearing about the ordering of the cosmos. When you first meet Zera and Legion, you hear all about the ordering of the cosmos, where the Naru were involved in it in some way. And I'm thinking a lot. This is all stuff that I want to start hearing about. But as you said earlier, and that's one of the reasons that I felt like I wanted to address it. This is like an expansion of stuff that comes up, and you feel like, wow, that would be really amazing to explore, and then you don't really quite get to explore it. And I think again, it is part of that pacing issue. Um, and I also think it's to a certain degree a part of the fact that the people working on this know what the next two expansions are going to be, but we don't.
Yeah, and I mean
So
that's we're in a unique position in that regard too, right? Because we have this is the first time ever that they've been upfront about the fact that this 3 expansion cycle might as well just be one expansion, essentially. It might as well
and it's
be
too big for us to do this as one expansion, so we're doing it as 3.
yeah. So I mean, I'm with you there. I'm with you. But then we get to the end of it, and of course the after defeating the raid and defeating Dementius again, there is the inevitable betrayal of Xalatath, which we all know is going to come, where she takes the Dark Heart, says she has everything she needs, and then next thing you know, we have the Midnight teaser trailer. And then whatever is presumably going to happen at the Gamescom cinematic reveal, which happens as the time of this recording the very next day. So we'll get to see that, but then we have to go clean up some.
It's going to be
a
fun Blizzard Watch recording.
It will definitely be a fun Blizzard Watch recording. Then we have to essentially clean up some of the mess because the Wastelanders then now have a decision to go and tear down all of the ecodomes that are being created in order to bring life back to Koresh. This has been Venari's plan since the beginning. Venari, who went to the Maw and likely went to the Maw to learn how anima works, would be my guess, and is starting to apply that theory to reviving a world soul. The ecodomes are these broad, like little pieces of life that you're bringing living creatures to these domes as sort of like a living zoo, but these are living creatures, and those living creatures have experiences. Those experiences generate anima, and as near as we can tell, that's part of the whole system that Venari is utilizing to try to resurrect Koresh, which I think is fascinating in and of itself.
Yep.
Which we'll get into that in a second. But you have to go, and when you're in the Ecodome dungeon, which canonically happens after the raid, you are essentially fighting against the Wastelanders, stopping them from essentially tearing down the ecodomes because they are not an affront to Koresh. They're actually the only thing that might bring Koresh back to one piece, which I think is absolutely fascinating. So I'll turn it over to Matt and see if he's got some thoughts on that.
I think that connects to my idea that we're looking at something not dissimilar to the Naru, where you've got the dark and the light as cycles. And I think part of the problem we've got from the beginning is that our original view of the void comes not even from the light. It comes from the Titans. And from the beginning, we've been saying, like, I think the last couple of expansions have to some degree more or less been about how the Titans are at best blinded by their perspective. The Titans are like, and I hate to use computer metaphors for things that are not specifically relevant, but I think in this case, when I make this terrible metaphor, Joe will come in and clean it up. So I'm feeling good about it. I think the Titans are like what an AI is in our real world. It's an algorithm that doesn't actually have the ability to make creative decisions. It can copy what it's seen. It can make order because it's seen order. And that's it. And it's only when exposed to other forces, essentially it would be like getting more programming added, that it can adjust to a new situation. The relationship between ANR and Elune comes to mind as a situation where one Titan began to experience things outside of its own perspective. And by doing that, gained the ability to understand the situation in a more nuanced way and react to it in a way that it made Amanthul mad because he didn't get it. Like literally, his anger was that this wasn't controllable. This was chaotic. And yes, it's chaotic, but chaos is a part of existence. Like you can't just be an order maniac when there's multiple cosmic forces that create the whole of reality around you. And I think that's one of the reasons why you and I have talked about this before, about the whole idea that the final Titan or the last Titan isn't a Titan at all. I think it's because it will transcend what Titans have been. It will not be just one cosmic force, and it won't be just one or two cosmic forces. It'll be all of it. It'll be everything in one package, which is why it has to be the world soul of Azeroth, because Azeroth is the one that feels like a big keystone, like in the middle of this whole thing. I think that what we're seeing here is a part of that whole thing. We're also seeing that Argus is going to come back.
Or at least could.
Could. Because for the same reason. These things don't die. They do not live. They do not die. They are outside the cycle. No one ever said that was about the old gods.
Yeah, and it could. While the Forsaken definitely fall into that category as well.
Yeah,
I mean,
but look at
nothing says that it can't be the Titans.
And for that matter, what if that's what's so scary about Sylvanas? Is that here she is, a mortal being who has now somehow not. She was a piece of a person for a while, and yet became more. In a weird sort of way, what if the Titans have always been fragments? What if the whole Aman'Thul was, from the beginning, he was a world soul with a very limited perspective. He wasn't supposed to be a singular world soul. He even felt that. So he went out looking for other world souls, but he couldn't do right by them because he himself was just this raw one perspective being.
See, and I can understand where you would go that. I don't know that I necessarily agree, simply because we've seen enough interaction at this point that I think that they are not necessarily incapable of understanding.
I don't think they're not incapable either. I think that's the point, that they can learn and grow. It's just that Aman'Thul was afraid of that.
Yeah.
Like, and that's the thing with the Aeonar Elune thing that I think fascinates me the most. You talked about it before. What is Elune? We don't know what Elune is. Well, who knows if we're going to find out in this expansion. But I think the fact that it's called Midnight, and the fact that one of Elune's three main aspects is the Night Warrior, I think we're going somewhere where something like this could come up. And I do think the fact that Xal'atath is like, I got what I needed, and bamfs out, I keep coming back to that idea. This feels like an expansion of greatest hits references. Like we've seen with the Earthen and Dornegal a lot of stuff about the Titans and about the Titans' servants on Azeroth, and the whole deal of what's going on now with the Earthen. Instead of having like a few diamondy people, almost all the Earthen feel like they're now the new Earthen that are being created feel like they're all kind of like Magni was.
Mm-hmm.
The Azeroth now has all these voices, and we see here in the Mana Forge the thing about the army that gets created. Think about what we're looking at when we see what's happening in the Mana Forge. How the effectively the untethered souls, I think they're called, of the ethereal people are being put into like vats and effectively, void blasted until they just give up.
Which I think is interesting because they call them untethered, but like that's all of the Ethereals.
Yeah, but some of the Ethereals tether themselves. They have the suits. They have the wrappings. Why do you need to get them out of that to do this to them? And what does it have to do with... I'm going back again to Legion. There's a whole bit with, of all people, Illidan, where he says, you seem to have a unique immortal soul like myself. Remember that?
Yeah.
And what is the first thing? What's the difference between a wisp or a soul fragment and an untethered ethereal? Like, what is going on here? I feel like this is just so close to being coherent and making sense. I feel like the only reason it doesn't is because we haven't spent the time on little fragments that
Yeah.
could feed back into
And
it.
I think that's part of. I guess we can go into we only have like about 15 minutes left, so like that's part of my I guess problem with this current uh content. Not that I don't enjoy it, but it feels like there's not enough. There's not enough time to explore all the little intricacies, and instead of like this all seems like something that would be better served by more subtlety, more nuance, more time. And yes, we're probably going to find out more about it. I don't doubt that. But the question is when? Is it going to even be in midnight? Will it not be until the last Titan? Will it even be in the last Titan? And the reason I bring that up is because, again, we're talking about the breakneck pace. And then the other thing, and I may get flamed for this, and that's fine. Part of my problem with this particular part of the expansion is that it feels like it has twists for the sake of twists, not for serving a greater purpose. Does that make sense? Like Zelda's portrayal is not a twist. That we always knew. We always knew she was going to eat anything we do that involves her.
It's a twist, but it's a twist that we knew was going to happen so it's not a twist functionally.
But like, going to Koresh in general is a twist, at least in my opinion, this early. The stuff with the Ethereals and the Wastelanders and the Oaths is a twist for what feels like the sake of just having a twist versus exploring what the Oaths are and what that magic is. Because, like you said, Venari was in the mall. You cannot tell me Venari did not, at any point in time, study domination magic.
Well, no, and to the fact here, that's actually very interesting. You talked before, just now, about how Venari, one of the reasons you think she went there was to study anima.
Mm-hmm.
What is the deal with the Pantheon of Death? Like, they had prototypes, and then they show up, and they're kind of changed by the places they find themselves in, where the Winter Queen becomes more Winter Queenie as she's inside Ardenweald and so forth. Is that, like, that's interesting in terms of it's not an oath the way we would think of it, but it is a binding.
Mm-hmm.
It is a change of your nature to fit the place you're in. I keep going back to the idea of the oaths that we see here as similar to the idea that, in order to take power over a place, you must become part of it. The old idea that a king of a land couldn't be sick, couldn't be disfigured, because the land and the king were together. And if the king or queen, whoever was ruling, had a flaw, that would be reflected in the land. And I'm looking at what we've done on Koresh. Koresh is obviously a world that is, on the verge of just disintegration. It's even worse than Outland. It is, at one point they even say it is a husk, but it bears certain similarities to Outland, to the point where they started building.
Well, I wouldn't go far to say it's worse than Outland, because there's more of it more centrally located to the core of what the planet was. If you look up, like, we're on the fringes of it, but there's still a core planet there. Draenor's gone. So
yeah, but the parts of Draenor that are left are still alive. In a way that Koresh is not currently.
I would argue it's the opposite, but go ahead.
Let me get to where I was going. You talked about how she's bringing living animals to Koresh and setting up the eco domes, and how that might be part of how to repair the planet. I keep looking at this and going, okay, wait a minute. If she's bringing them there because they have anima, they're living things. All living things have anima. Is she doing kind of the same thing as what happens with like Ardenweald? Like, is she funneling the
I,
anima in a resurrecting path into the planet's core, into the world soul itself? And if she's doing that, is she making something like Kaliamenethil?
I think it's more than that. I think it's an observation of what the Titans and what the first ones were doing.
Or what the first ones were doing and what the Titans copied.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
And the Titans, again, the only Titans that seem to have the capacity to make to grow and have changes are the ones who don't just stick to order. The
Now,
ones who kind of go into other things, like Aonar with life, as Sargeras with Fel. And we've got a lot of Titans and Titanforge that can use the light, but do we have a light Titan?
we don't know.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I keep wondering about.
I mean, I think we've both argued at one point in time that that could have very well been Sargeras.
It could have been Sargeras, but here's a question: what if all this stuff happening it's a way to basically what we're seeing on Koresh is like the same thing that we saw in Azeroth, just in a far more desperate and advanced stage. Because Azeroth was put at the center of Titan machinery that fed power back into it.
That's what I was gonna go. I was gonna say the same thing, right? Like I think there's a level of that there, because I think the idea of feeding anima back into the planet is something that Venari saw either from discussions with us or whatever traded information that they have. The interesting thing, though, to go back to what you said earlier about, you think that Koresh is worse than Draenor. I think it's actually the opposite. And I think that part of that reason is because with Draenor, part of the whole story of it, even now, currently, and why like Thrall came back is it's not sustainable anymore. It is dying, right?
It never. Here's the thing, man. Though, was it ever sustainable?
I don't think it ever
The
was. I think it
only
was always
reason-
decaying.
Oh, here's the thing: before it became Outland, when it was Draenor, was it sustainable? A Titan had to come along and create a living servant the size of a mountain just to keep the plant life from devouring the entire world. And that's because Draenor didn't have a world soul. Koresh has a world soul. Azeroth has a world soul. Argus had a world soul.
But I think that's
worlds with world souls are different than worlds without them.
They are.
And I think that one of the things that you hear in this expansion and in this patch is they say Koresh was once a savage and dangerous world, and we used the Reshi wraps to create, Edens on it. And I'm looking at going, so it was a world where the natural forces were in conflict because of what? Was it like Azeroth or like Draenor? Draenor, the natural forces were in conflict because one of them was eating all of that anima and becoming so powerful that it could devour the whole world. On Azeroth, everybody was anima starved, so everybody was fighting tooth, nail, and claw and elemental force to survive. And the reason I think that Draenor is distinct in that way, and I think that Koresh and Azeroth are more alike than not, is that Koresh has dragons.
Well,
the void dragons that we see on Koresh are not fundamentally very different.
I want to make
Nether Drakes.
I want to make it a point that we do not have confirmation of where those dragons came from.
No, we don't.
And we don't have any confirmation that those were not stolen or from other worlds.
Yeah, but what if they are from other worlds, but not Azeroth? See, seeing dragons, when we were previously kind of given the idea that dragons originally evolved from drakes and then the Titans come along and do stuff to them. What if that means that every world has its own elemental entities? See, you pointed out, we don't know how the oracles on Koresh, how they interacted with their world soul without getting, turned into diamond. Like, Is that process of getting turned into diamond necessary to talk to the world soul?
No, and I think part of that is, and I think this is where, again, this is going to be distinctions later. It's levels of maturity in the world soul. I think,
I
right?
think it's levels of Titan interference in the world
Maybe,
soul.
maybe. Um, but I think there's a level of it or a layer of it that is, yeah, maybe contingent on the actual like Titan interference, which is again likely what the last expansion of this trilogy is all going to be about,
Hmm.
and about why that wasn't necessarily the best thing for Azeroth, because I'm sure that's going to be the story hook. Um, which I would not be surprised. We've had inklings of this for years at this point. Um, but the reason that I think Koresh and Draenor in particular are different. Koresh was a savage world that could be tamed. We don't have the full breadth of it. We also don't know if that was just hyperbole, because the people that were telling us this are people that then betray us. um, the other side of that, though, is it has a world soul, and Draenor we know does not. And I think that the fact that pieces of the world soul are still there are what's allowing Venari to essentially, I don't want to say jumpstart it, but try to resurrect the planet, and why things like the ecodomes work, because there's
And
something there, there's a mechanism there that can cycle the anima.
then here's a question for you. Why were they building ecodomes in the Mana Storm? And were they working?
So that's the thing. I don't think they were working,
Yeah.
because when you
And
go back to the ecodomes and go back and look at them, they're not as lush as the ones that Venari just set up.
but who was setting them up? Venari was off in the maw. Did
Hmm.
somebody steal her work? What was the point? Was Dementius's followers doing this?
No, we know it was the consortium,
Well,
right? It was the
the
consortium.
consortium, yeah, but the consortium, like a lot of them, were misled. Remember that even there's people even in the consortium who were misled by the king, who was pretending to be fighting Dementius while secretly working for him.
Yeah.
Locust Walker tells us that, but now Locust Walker has been lying to us too.
Well, to be fair,
So
Locust Walker has been omitting.
yeah, but lying by omission is still a lie.
Sure.
Yeah, he doesn't say outright false things, but he might not tell you something else. But let me. I don't know how much time we have left. How much time we have left?
Couple minutes.
All right, I'm going to try to break this down really fast. We know that as far as we know, the Titans created summoning magic. And the reason that it worked was because Sargeras and others like him used it to pull entities to him so he could imprison them. And the world that we see the demon hunters explore in Legion is the world that he first used as a prison world to hold like everybody. It held dreadlords, it held other demons, the fell ones. It could hold pretty much anything. He could summon people to it and hold them there with death power. We know that sounds an awful lot like domination magic.
Mm-hmm.
We know that domination magic and these new oaths seem very similar. We know that void entities can be summoned in the same way as fell entities. And we don't know what the limit on that is. Can anything be summoned? And summoning magic does not need your permission. It's forced on you. You don't, some entities can resist and say, I'm not coming. But, like when you summon an imp, the imp doesn't get a choice. It's just the imp is pulled to you and has to do what you tell it, assuming you do the ritual right. I think that a lot of this stuff, this is underpinnings of what we're seeing are the rules of anima. Like, I think that anima is the root of all magic, as well as all
Yeah,
life.
I would agree with that.
And anima has rules because anima is a part of the creation and sustenance of existence. Even the void has to obey those rules. But the thing coming from outside doesn't, because it is not part of this cosmos. I feel like what we're seeing on Koresh, I think to a degree, I'm going to say this again, and then I'm going to explain what I mean by it. I think Koresh, what happened to Koresh is much worse than what happened to Draenor. But I
Yes.
think Draenor died because it didn't have a world soul in the first place.
Okay. Yeah, that I can
And
agree with.
and I think the reason it didn't have a world soul was that the idea that it just never had one, that's a Titan thing. That's the Titans going, well, it doesn't have a world soul, so it's not important. They didn't stop to check in and see what is the possibility here that there's a reason that the world soul wasn't there. Like, did it get eaten? Did it get used? Did it leave without destroying the world? Did the world soul get used up? Or was there just never one? That's all stuff we don't know. But I do think that Koresh, since it has a world soul and that world soul is still in some kind of existence, can come back from worse than what Draenor got. I think what happened to Azeroth when Aman'Thul ripped Shiraj out of its body, the wound that he inflicted would have killed Draenor because there wasn't anything there to keep the planet alive. And since we know anima is the thing that keeps worlds alive, world souls, and we know that world souls devour anima.
Well, we
Right?
also know that world souls are anima, otherwise Argus wouldn't have been able to have been sent to them all in the first place.
Yeah, and they collect anima. They collect more. It's like they're cocooning themselves up, making themselves bigger. Finally, they hit a critical mass, and they are entities of their own. Like Azeroth is not at that point yet. Azeroth is at the nascent stage where it can have dreams, and it can influence stuff around it, but it isn't really a being yet. It hasn't gotten to that threshold. At least that's how it seems so far. So yeah, I feel like a lot of this it's going in that direction where all these things are going to be tied together. But I feel like at this point we're sort of bouncing off the walls here. Like
Yeah,
we keep we keep not knowing what exactly is happening.
yeah, and again, I think the greatest tragedy, at least of the current storyline, is we haven't had enough time to explore Koresh and what its meaning is to the greater universe. But I think we're gonna have to cut it there for now. Friends, I do want to thank you for joining us. Again, Blizzard Watch is made possible due to your generous contributions at patreon.com/Blizzard Watch. Your continued support means that this podcast signing community is able to thrive and grow. Blizzard Watch supporters enjoy exclusive benefits like early access to the podcast, better chance at having your question answered on our podcast, or the Q and an ads reset experience. Again, if you have questions for this or any of our podcasts, be sure to send those in to podcast@blizzardwatch.com. Specify the show that is for in the subject line, as well as any special pronunciation of your name. If you want to hit us up on Discord, you can hit us up in the Q and podcast questions channel. Same rules apply. And if you are a Patreon member, you can hit us up on the Patreon Q and podcast questions channel. We tend to look there first as a way of saying thank you for helping us keep the lights on. But with that, folks, we'll see you next week.